You are in for a treat today. We are going to be talking about religion in the public schools. And this is Scott Ferrin, professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Foundations, right here at the David O. McKay School of Education at BYU. He's also an adjunct professor of law at the J. Reuben Clark Law School here at BYU, and he's an affiliated scholar at the Wheatley Institution. So how this is going to work is he's going to give a presentation, and then all of you at the end will have some time to ask questions. So please save your questions for the end, and we will pass around the microphone, and you can ask all the questions you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Is there going to be a bell? DC longer. I don't want to waste any of that time. So here's what our intention is. I've given you, let's show you all the gifts you've been given. I didn't bring t-shirts, but I did bring this. Now this right here is me. So it's not citing anybody because it's just me. But it's also, you can't copy and send it around, if you will. Just use it for today and keep it if you want. But it's supposed to be parts of it, or large parts of it, I've cannibalized and moved it around, are going to be in the McKay alumni magazine for the School of Education. So I can't have you just make willy-nilly copies right now. But it's just, and we're not going to talk directly from it, but it just might, as you look through it when I get boring or whatever, you can say, I have a question, and we can raise questions if you want, and we might look at it, we might not. You also have this from the PTA's First Amendment Center, which has some really simple and basic guides about how to do these sorts of things, student religious clubs, excusals, baccalaureate services, please.
Do you have any more copies of either your
Of the green one? I have. They're coming, but there weren't enough. I didn't bring enough of those. I didn't bring them. Someone else brought them. I was so glad they did.
Pamphlets we have back there.
Okay, there's a few more back there. And then there's from the First Amendment Center, and I really like the First Amendment Center. Rights, Religion, and Responsibilities, the 3 R's project, the things they do. It's a teacher's guide to religion in public schools. Well, that would be helpful for parents and others too. So if you don't have one of these, there's plenty of these up here. So if you didn't get one already, let's just send them back. Just send back and see anybody that wants some and pick those up. And there's plenty for afterwards if we need them, all right? With that said, I thought we might go through a few basic things. And I think maybe we could start, then we'll go back to my PowerPoint if that's what you want. You stop and you say, here's what I really want to know, Scott. I really want to know this, or here's my question or my problem. We'll go to that. Because I can make up an answer right here, right now. And so, here's, if you were to look at this part, the central question is, how do I protect religious freedom and discourse, my own and that of my students or children, while still respecting the important values of the First Amendment and the right of parents and students to ensure that their children are not proselyted or indoctrinated by state employees in the state compulsory education setting. And this becomes most important when you're talking about religious minorities. Where do religious minorities occur? Where do we come into conflict most often? In school settings, because schools are run locally. And locally is where we have a religious minority and a religious majority. And so this is heartfelt stuff. This is the kind of things for which people will lose their sense of humor. And so my wife and I went to see the movie Saturday's Warriors the other night. And they have it on in Utah right now, if you wanted to see it. It's actually pretty good. If you're of my era, Saturday's Warriors is the first LDS sort of musical that was kind of good. It seemed like it to me. We're sitting there watching it, and a buffalo comes in and sits down next to us. And the buffalo's sitting there with flies going around, and I turned to the buffalo and I said, "What are you doing in the movie?" He turned to me and he was sort of munching alfalfa. I liked the book. Anyway, so as I don't think there is a book of Saturday's Warrior, is there? I'm not sure. But so as we think about these things, I'm proving that you don't have to lose your sense of humor about these issues that can divide us so deeply. There's a couple, 3 or 4 seats right through this vein here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's even some up front, but again, no Latter-day Saint would ever sit on the front row, unless by assignment. What are the most important actions? Number 2. What are the most important actions parents and others can take to protect religious freedom in educational settings? In my opinion, I want to start with this because we're going to talk about it in the middle a bit more. I'm troubled that right now, look at on page 2, the paragraph that starts with "that done." I'm troubled by this. I've been out and I've debated on TV and stuff on some of these things. I've tried not to make a career not be too involved in these things, but I've been brought in on same-sex marriage issues and things and how it affects the schools. And so I've been watching and looking at these things for some time. And I'm troubled when I've noticed something. Parents and others can help counteract what I personally perceive as a rise in poor research that tends to show that religion itself not only does not foment pro-social behavior, but is in of itself the cause of bigotry and anti-egalitarian and anti-social behavior. I'm just going to read this part, then we're going to come back to it. I just want you to get this early in, because I think this is one of the big new things going on. And it affects your perception as you try to step into the public arena and have an impact here, because you might be seen as the problem, not the solution. And here's part of why. Such research is generally conducted by social science researchers, statisticians, and psychology faculties, and I would add, and students and graduate students who are often quite ignorant on religious matters and issues, especially the religious tenets of religious minorities. And I'm going to start with this in case I don't get there. There are 2 chairs here if you move my bag, 2 chairs here, and 2 back there if anybody wants to. I guess she doesn't want to. So if you see somebody, send them up here, going along. Here's part of what I want you to recognize about some of that research. We're going to get into it a little bit, but I want you to recognize this one thing. When they research people's religious values, who are they researching generally? Are you aware of this? That in most of these studies where they do surveys or they do research about people's attitudes and whatnot, they're studying psychology students at universities, because in a lot of universities, the psychology students in the majors are encouraged to and even given incentives to answer surveys and things. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I'm going to suggest that someone in Mink Creek, Idaho, who's LDS, someone in Pima or Thatcher, Arizona, that's LDS, someone in Provo that's LDS, is not going to be the same as a psychology student necessarily, who won't be the same as an accounting student. And so, in general, I worry that the research is flawed to begin with, but there is a lot of research showing that those who are what they call intrinsics, that govern a lot of what they do by religious values, and that's a social science category that they've used, are seen as being bigoted and the problem. And so I'm going to suggest at the outset that you could look for, and you could foment, and you could celebrate good research that gets into nuances and doesn't show that religion's a problem, but in fact a good thing. And we're going to end with a quote about that in a sense or thing too. I wanted to start with it. And I want to make sure you understand that I think that the right solution is not less religion, it's more deeply understood in so many ways, including with the religious minorities. So if it's all right, unless you have questions about what I just said, I'm going to stop, see if you do. I'm going to just get into a bit of our PowerPoint, only to guide a little bit. We may not get through all of these. This is going to be a little loose and rollicking, and I'm supposed to stop right at 2:15. Is that right, Janet? So 2:15. So right now, and so I would just think this is an important question, ontological question for a lot of people. It's also religious. When will I be old enough to start suing people? We have a whole lot of conflict in this area. I want to make sure we understand that if you hate the ACLU, and everybody loves to hate the ACLU, I can give you a long line of cases where the ACLU has represented religious peoples, including Latter-day Saints, about challenging and difficult issues that they've faced in local communities, especially about schools and things. So I just think we need to recognize it'd be good to take the tone down a little bit on some of these issues, but we care a lot. So in the schools, I want to make sure Utah is an example. Then it's an example where a lot of you might be aware of and interested in some ways. I want to make sure we understand some of the organization. I'm not going to go deep into this, because we've had some interesting things that happen. We've decided in Utah that the way we selected our State Board of Education, we didn't decide that, a judge decided it was unconstitutional. And so we've changed that, and in 2018, I think it's 2018 that will begin, maybe it's 2017, whatever it is, the State Board of Education will now be a partisan election, where you'll get to know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. We have traditionally said on education we don't need to do that. It's not supposed to be a political issue per se. Are we naive about that? So here's where we are on education. The citizens are supposed to be in control, except it's moderated by, passes through the U.S. Constitution, or the Utah Constitution and the U.S. Constitution for that matter. Anyone know the Constitution of Utah's anti-establishment feature, which is very unique and interesting? it says that Utah is required to establish a system of public education free from sectarian control. You don't see that provision in most other states' constitutions. That was because to become a state, we had to make some real guarantees about what then existed as the ward schools and the state academies. We have here Mark Bryce, who, Mark, would you be willing to stand for just a moment, please? Dr. Bryce is the president of Eastern Arizona College and also a lawyer, but I'm sure when he goes to the pearly gates, he'll describe himself as an educator, so he can get in. But Eastern Arizona College is not only where President Kimball went, it's where my parents went there, but also it was a state academy. It was an LDS state academy that blossomed and grew in, and then was given to the state, and now it's grown into what is a really great university, from which we've got some good football coaches and players over there at the BYU. Grateful for that. That's the Constitution of Utah that says, especially about religion, got to be free from sectarian control. I maintain that that's going to be interesting at the next major voucher battle, to take public funds to go to private schools and things, if it were to result in very Mormon-like in other schools, because there is a religious majority. So that's an interesting part of it. And of course, the state legislature really controls everything down to the curriculum in a lot of ways. Make sure we understand how that works. The reason we're going over this, and we're taking a lot of time on this, do tell me if I need to go faster, because this is one of the few graphics I have. Don't expect for a lot more fun things. You can go, and especially, how many here are lawyers, if you're willing to admit it? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, education lawyers and education leaders, when you walk in, you can start to saber rattle, but if you don't know where the inflection points are, where the issues are, what they can and can't do, what they're protected from, they'll have little effect. So there are some things that the school leaders can and can't change, some things that were within their purview and some things that weren't. And so let's make sure we understand that basically the state legislature gets to control so many things, including, to large measure, the curriculum. Okay, make sure we understand that. Then in Utah, we have developed relatively recently as charter school boards, because they perceived that the state school board wasn't making charter schools quickly enough. And so then we have local school districts with their school boards, and then charter schools. Why is there a dotted line here to charter schools? Because there are provisions back and forth and supports back and forth in so many ways. And local school districts used to have a role there. And local school districts can have their own charter school. They can have an online charter school and things. So we have some interesting mixes. But the key thing for us today is, in almost every state and union that I'm aware of at all, every charter school has been described as a public school, which puts the same religion requirements and religion protections on it as every other public school. Okay. Now from this, any questions or thoughts? Because if you come in and start to foment, I want change on this or that, and you're coming here, and they say, well, we would like to change that too. You're kind of not, we're not really having an impact here, when the impact needed to be up here at the state legislature, or the governor's office, or somewhere else, okay? Questions or thoughts, please?
Can you explain a little bit about the idea behind charter schools?
Basically, charter schools, my classmate was Al Shanker when I was in school. He was the president of the AFT, American Federation of Teachers. And Al and those others got out in front on the charter school movement and said, as a union, we're going to stop fighting. And so they got engaged and said, charter schools are set up to be public schools. He wanted them to be public schools and not go away. He didn't want to, and so he and they were very much engaged, and we developed charter schools around the country. In other words, the First Amendment applies completely. And a charter school, their local school board is their own board. Almost every state's the same. There might be some differences I'm not aware of. And for No Child Left Behind in the old days and everything else, a charter school is its own school district. And so they get their own WPU or weighted pupil unit money for them. The teachers are at will, they can be fired, there's no tenure. They get paid more usually because there's also no retirement. And a few of those things are good, important features. Now, there are some things that are unique there. The parents come hoping to have more control, and sometimes they want there to be more religious expression, which sometimes can't be met, under the Constitution. Parents are required in most places to transport or get together to transport, or the charter school finds a way to help with transporting their kids to school. So you get a certain kind of parent right now because of that. Charter schools, unless they're set up specifically to work with kids with special needs, tend to have less kids with special needs. In Utah, we're approaching 10% of the kids in the public schools are Hispanic. In the charter schools, it's less than 1%. Again, because of the structural issues about a charter school, not because anyone's turning them away, per se. Is that enough? Is that okay on charter schools? Please.
Legally, who controls the curriculum both in public and private primary and secondary schools?
Okay, in private, no one except their accrediting agencies, and if the state will require that they teach some of the basic, things to be accredited in a private school or homeschool. For example, if you homeschool your child, you're required to say, in Utah, it's different in other states, but it's pretty similar in some ways. Utah's what we call a very permissive state about this. You have to say, I will teach the core subjects, the 5 core subjects. You don't ever have to be tested about it. You don't ever have to prove that you did it. You just have to say you will. So private schools, no control. Charter schools, only that they have to teach the basics that Utah has, but then they control the curriculum completely. But in a regular public school, it's done through the State Board of Education, through the state legislature, through the local school districts, with the legislature having the biggest impact on what's in the curriculum. So for example, if we go back to Massachusetts, where a difficult case came up some years ago, in Massachusetts, it was about kids getting sent home things about Prince and Prince, and being taught about this good story where the kids the prince was supposed to go in the old days find a queen, but he found another prince. And parents were upset about that. One of the parents was a workman. It was a classic case. I've got it in my, when I get to my slides, that's all I can tell. And the challenge was that curriculum was kind of, in some ways, mandated by their standards in Massachusetts. Now, I'm not sure it had to be implemented the way it was. So a lot of the curricular standards are set in the state. So Massachusetts has something that requires kids by a certain age to be able to find the different types of families that exist. Okay, well that could bother some people, but your local school's not going to be able to change that. They tried. You're going to have to change that in the legislative, sort of state legislature or other places. And by the way, in the law case on that one, the judge had some condescending things to say, it seemed like to me, that seemed to bristle with some hostility toward religion, and said, well, if you don't like this type of thing, then you're free to affect the ballot place. Because we can't, the school is caught in the middle, which is right and wrong, because religious minorities are not supposed to have to protect themselves through the ballot box. There's supposed to be a thing called the Constitution. But that's where we are. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Anything else before I go on? That's just to get us started about kind of the form and format. And so as we're talking now, again, please break in with any and all questions. Be turned to tolerate from love thy neighbor. Fit with what we were talking about today, I think. Just more realistic goals. Just some basics. These are very basic, but make sure we understand, because I believe this is part of the beginning of disaffection with the public schools. There's a host of reasons for disaffection from deeply religious people to the public schools, but part of it is going to be because in '62 we said you can't have prayer in the public schools. And that was sort of voluntary, although it looked like it wasn't too voluntary the way they did things before it. Then we have Abington versus Shemp, which is a really cool one that says you can't even have Bible readings, even if student participation is optional. I think that overreaches, and maybe our current Supreme Court might say you could. Okay, that's my thought. I could be wrong, I doubt it. And then Wallace v. Jaffray was a moment of silence. Do you know that Utah has a moment of silence on its books right now, and it hasn't been found unconstitutional? But in Wallace v. Jaffray, the United States Supreme Court looked at the history, the legislative history of a moment of silence. Come on, my wife is a kindergarten teacher back here. Davey, just raise your hand if you. Okay, she would love any moment of silence, and it makes me religious any moment that she has one. But the legislature, in the legislative history, gave the rationale for why he was doing this, and it was because he wanted to return religion to the schools. So if he hadn't said that, it wouldn't have had a religious purpose, and you have the lemon test being used, and first it's got to have a secular purpose for the law. But that's bothered our Supreme Court justices, including Senator O'Connor and others. Well, who gets to tell what the purpose was for why I voted for this as a legislator? So we have, you can see, we've set up ourselves for conflict and full employment of attorneys. And so, Lee versus Wiseman in Rhode Island, I was here at this time for when this was going on, working for the summer with the Attorney General here, and I knew a bit about what was going on here. In Rhode Island, they wanted to have graduation prayer at the high school. And I used to work in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is about 60% Catholic. They invited, in an area that was predominantly Catholic, they invited a rabbi to offer the graduation prayer, which I think was a nice thing. And the principal gave him a little pamphlet, not about the size of the green one, from the Conference of Christians and Jews, which is now called the Conference because they left out some others when they did just the Conference of Christians and Jews. And it explained how to pray, to be inclusive and not, and not exclusive and whatnot. And by doing that, they then established a state-ordered form of prayer, perhaps. And that was part of the problem. And then a Jewish student challenged that, saying, I shouldn't have to have a prayer occur at my graduation. So here's what people misunderstand that case for, and here's what it's about. They misunderstand it to say, if it's student-led and initiated, it's always okay. That was dicta, or a saying that the court said along the way. Because the court had to decide whether administrator-led and initiated prayer was okay or not. And they said it was not. Okay? Although at the 10th Circuit, where Utah resides, had said that administrator-led prayer prior to that was okay. It didn't violate the First Amendment. Then they changed it. They said in dicta, now this isn't the case of student-led initiated prayer, which might be all right. I don't even think they said might. But they can't. You got to only decide an actual case in controversy. You can't say stuff that's not before you as the court. But we've all taken that, especially if you live in a circuit where they already said administrator-led prayer was okay. They've taken that and said if something is student-led and initiated, it's probably going to pass constitutional muster. And it might, especially now with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, although we haven't heard from a couple of the recent new appointees to the court, and we're waiting for one more, about prayer. We've heard about some other things, but not about prayer. Okay, so that's Lee versus Wiseman. And so, did you want to tell us anything about graduation? So what, is that okay? So just, what did you just do at graduation? I'm talking about the college.
People always ask me if we're going to have a prayer at graduation. I tell them no, we're going to have two. and this is how.
You hear that? No, we're going to have two.
And this is how we do it. Call the student in. We say, you live in the United States of America. There is a First Amendment. You have freedom of speech. You're invited to give a First Amendment expression at graduation. We will not tell you what to do. You can dance a jig, play the accordion, recite a poem. You can
recite the First Amendment.
You could pray, whatever you'd like to do. We're going to have one of these at the first, one at the end. We're going to have a student talk in the middle. What would you like to do? And
so this is student-led initiated.
Last 14 years we've had prayer beginning and end of graduation.
This is the Gila Valley in Arizona.
And I'm waiting for the day that they want to challenge us, because we'll fight them all the way to the Supreme Court, because there is a First Amendment and you have freedom of expression.
Okay.
If it happens to be religious, that's...
But it was student expression. Let's remind ourselves that students are protected from religious indoctrination by the state. And so you have to decide whether that's the state or not first. This is also what comes up with third graders and second graders in schools when they're inviting kids and teachers and parents to their baptisms that are LDS. And so is that a problem? Because we often hear in Utah and other places, stop your kid from proselyting my kid. Well, the problem with that is that the kids, if they're doing it away from the curriculum and in a way that isn't harassing, have the right to free exercise of religion, have the right to invite people, have the right to warn their neighbors. All kinds of things that we as the state can't come in and stop. And so we got to make sure we understand those things. Then Santa Fe versus Doe is a little bit related to President Price's position, which is at that high school in Santa Fe, Mormon and Catholic plaintiffs brought a suit saying we don't want prayer at the football games. Now, you know that if you've been to, this is not Santa Fe, New Mexico, or the Catholics wouldn't be in the minority. This is Santa Fe, Texas. And the Catholics and Mormons are in the minority there. And the question was whether that was constitutional to have, prayer at the graduation, at the football games. And by the way, in the questioning, the oral examination during the Supreme Court, Senator O'Connor showed she hasn't been to Texas. Because she asked a question. She's from rural Arizona, where my family's from. She asked a question because she was wondering. Well, this is not religious. It's just solemnizing the football game. She said, "How do you solemnize a football game?" I said, she's never been in a Friday night in Texas.
Yeah.
I've been at 25,000 seat stadiums that look better than most colleges in Texas. And so it's a big deal. they found that was unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court, it was what was called a plurality opinion. We don't know exactly why. They just said it would result in majoritarian divisiveness. And part of it was they tried to do something a little bit like what President Bryce did, but he's with adults, and he did it in a very sophisticated way. They said, hey, we're going to ask you a question. Do you want to have prayer at football games? Okay, that's not student-led initiative, the court, I think thought. I know 4 members thought. I don't know if 5 did or not, because again, a plurality decision, you can't tell exactly what they think. And they said, we're going to even let you have, we're going to facilitate a vote, and then they got to vote for it, and the students voted for having one student chaplain assigned all year long to give the prayer. Well, of course, it's going to tend to be the majority person, the majority religion that gets elected, and they'll give the majority kind of prayer all the way through. Then the Supreme Court said, no, that's the result of majoritarian divisiveness. So these are they've set up some of the major challenges. Now, you and I know there's been something since then called Obergefell, and some other cases before it, that deal with the rights of peoples to be free from control. And we had the Defense of Marriage Act struck down, and all kinds of things about the conceptions of the family that's also come along since then. But this is the real start of a lot of our conflict about prayer in the schools and other religious issues in the schools. And then we add other things. And then related to that is the Equal Access Act. The Equal Access Act was authored by Hatch and Kennedy together, a Mormon and a Catholic together, because we had a case called Engel, well, it doesn't matter. We had some other case, Widmar versus Vincent, in the higher ed arena, and others that said, well, can you let there be religious observances at clubs in higher ed? And we said, yeah. Okay, so that was the Widmar versus Vincent case, because they're adults, they're old enough, and they haven't seen a lot of freshmen, but they are really adult, and they can perceive that this is not government endorsement. Then the circuits all split about what about our high schools? So Hatch and Kennedy wrote the Equal Access Act, which said, basically, if you have any non-curriculum related clubs in a high school, then you've got to allow all curriculum related clubs within some limits, and we'll look at some of those limits if you want. And that's created some challenges for people because not everyone's ready for, in their community, PFLAG, GLSEN, parents for lesbian and gay students is PFLAG, GLSEN is gay, lesbian students network, and others that you know about. And so that's where some of that challenge comes from, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court in an important case called Widmar, and so just be aware of that. So some of this is about speech. Now I'm going to stop because I've been talking a little fast, and I'm going to see if I'm leaving questions already, because we're going to talk about speech, because speech gets conflated with religion in so many ways. Please.
So in this speech thing, just to take Utah State, how has that?
Oh, wait. We're supposed to give him the mic when he asks the question. That's such an astute question. We want it memorialized for eternity.
Oh, yikes. Anyway, so on this speech issue and equal access, and just taking the state of Utah as an example, can you describe to us like what's happened here,
Okay.
Student clubs, that type of thing?
Yes, let's take of Utah as an example. There's been people, East High had one of the first challenges some years ago about this, but parents didn't want to have the Gay-Straight Alliance, and other things as clubs. Some of the limitations on it is it has to be student-led. Okay, so this is it can't be done by youth ministers or others. There can be an adult there. There must be an adult there from the school, but the adult from the school can't be required to be there if it violates their own conscience rights, by the way. And then it's student-led initiated, it's student-led, let's put it that way, and they have to have it if there are any non-curriculum clubs. So one of the challenges has been, so schools have said, let's get rid of all our non-curriculum related clubs. So we've had one of those challenges go along. Then the question has been in Widmar, in Mergens, a case called Mergens, the question is whether when they had Subsurfers Club, which was a scuba diving club, is that curriculum related or not? Nah, it's a bit of a reach, the court said, so Sandra Day O'Connor wrote that opinion and said, yeah, you've got to have every club after that. This doesn't mean that you have to have clubs that exclude anyone. This doesn't mean you have to have clubs that teach how to make pipe bombs, and those sorts of things. They're good reasons, but you can't, just because they're religious, or just because they're supporting gay or lesbian students, you can't exclude clubs if you have other non-curricular related clubs. Now, there's a second and third generation issue that's rolled forward, and by the way, legislatures and others have tried to figure out how to deal with that in Utah, because Utah also has an unusually interesting statute about health ed. We divide up on sex ed in the states, or health ed, in states where you have mandatory sex ed. I'm going to call it sex ed. It's sexier. I'm going to call it, so that we have mandatory, we have permissive, we have opt-in. So we have opt-out, opt-in, mandatory, those sorts of things. Utah's opt-in. You are required in Utah to not answer spontaneous questions. Parents are allowed to see the exact curriculum, and that's exactly what's delivered, and parents have to opt their children in. So in Utah, we've had an attempt, and they tried to get me to help a bit, to say, well then, how can we have clubs where sexuality is discussed? And so we've tried to work that through, and it's still sort of not done. And so far, we're just going into the bare bones Mergen's case, which is, you got any non-curricular clubs, you basically have all non-curricular related clubs, unless they're excluding people, or unless they're dangerous, those sorts of things, okay? It'd be nice to have one that teaches kids to use their turn signals in Utah, please.
Well, yeah, and,
Oh, I forgot, sorry.
In Orem, close by, Timpanogos High School, when the Gay Straight Alliance Club was proposed by students, one of the parents said, look, I know there's already this legal precedent and everything, and he wants to get into another lawsuit, but can't we just say we've got the sex education already, that's enough for this school, let's leave these particular adult issues for the kids when they get to be adults and they're in college, and not get into that. And the principal at the time wasn't, he was trying to figure things out, working with the school board. The one thing he did say was, the very first suggestion by the students were, hey, let's go to the Salt Lake gay parade, whatever it's called.
Respect.
He said that as a field trip didn't seem like it was necessary for the club to do, so I think he kind of came down against that.
Yeah.
That's.
See, here's the problem with that. Thank you very much. So that we're now contextualizing this. You can come down on that principle, and you can give that principle all kinds of trouble. That the Mergen's decision was made by the United States Supreme Court. So how much room does the principal have to change that? The things she suggests would be good, if everybody will agree to do it, but there's a bedrock right for them to have. If there's any non-curriculum related club, it's established by the Act, and it's been interpreted by the case Mergen's, and M-E-R-G-E-N-S, the Mergen's case in the United States Supreme Court, that they have a bedrock right to have that club. They even have the right to have announcements go into boxes and over the PAs and things. It's just kind of a challenge, and it ruffles some feathers. But the principal's not the bad guy. You know, the principal, though, she or he has got to figure out how to deal with it. So thank you, please. And this is a reason some people will then decide to depart to a charter school, because that issue won't come up in the charter school possibly, because the parents that are doing the charter school are also on the board, and sometimes they're grandfathered in because their kids or came behind their kids, although it's open enrollment or it's a lottery. The charters can be friendlier about those kinds of things. And plus, there's not a lot of room for a lot of clubs at a charter school. But then again, if they want one at a charter school, they'll have to have one if they have any non-curricular related clubs. Please.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's cases that say that you have to allow access to clubs or different groups in.
Well, the statute is called the Equal Access Act. So what it requires is that if you have any non-curriculum related clubs, you've got to let there be any non-curriculum.
So this is my question. Are you talking about school-sponsored non-curricular clubs? So for example, is it possible that you have to allow access to clubs in the school, so the school isn't sponsoring them and they don't have to have a school official with the people there, but you have to let anybody come into the school? But the
Very good idea. Very good idea.
Is that possible?
I'm going to now, sorry, this is going to make it a little less clear for some, a little more clear for some perhaps. So there's something else called the Lamb's Chapel Doctrine. So let's now put over here, and let me describe here the Lamb's Chapel Doctrine. And then in a minute, let me do that in a minute, because I want to elucidate further the Mergen's, the Equal Access Act, okay? in the Equal Access Act, under the statute, the only way you get the right to have a non-curriculum related club trigger, all clubs have to be allowed in, is if you allow an adult, you have to have an adult there. It has to not be sponsored by the school, and it has to be run and led by students. So there's no wiggle room on that. Otherwise, that's just law, and it's been interpreted. And Congress left it a little open, and Sandra Day O'Connor's clarified some things Congress didn't make clear, and it's now very clear. Okay, so that's one part. But now I'm going to walk over into Lamb's Chapel land. In Lamb's Chapel, back when I went to law school, in the old days, by the way, in those days there were only 9 commandments instead of 10. So back in the old days, if you could say it's a reasonable limitation on our open forum to say no religious groups can rent the school. But then came the Lamb Chapel case that said just because it's a religious group, it's not reasonable to limit this open forum by saying no religious groups. Because there are things religious groups might do. And in Lamb's Chapel, they were showing a movie and teaching about parenting skills and things. That's run by parents. It's definitely not done by the schools, and they often have to rent the school to do that. So that's an option which you could do, and you don't have to ask for rent for that. Now, in the state of Utah, we have in our statutes that our schools are open for religious groups to use if they want to under the Lamb's Chapel doctrine. They can even do, other states have a limitation on open forum saying, okay, religious groups can access the school, but they can't do religious worship in after hours in the schools. Utah will let you do religious worship too. And because it's after hours, it's not violating the Constitution. That's Lamb's Chapel. But when you're back at clubs under Mergens and equal access, you have to have an adult there. But you can't force an adult that doesn't want to be there because it violates their conscience. And it has to be run by a kid or the kids, okay? Remember, you don't allow them to do a neo-Nazi club. You don't allow them to do certain kinds of things. Okay. Now I thought I saw a hand. Otherwise, we'll move forward,
I think
please.
you answered my question. What I was going to think, what if they wanted to start a neo-Nazi?
Yeah, absolutely. You can.
The Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have non-discrimination features in what you have. They're fine. This is part of why we had a little problem for a while about the Boy Scouts. Schools were not allowing the Boy Scouts in because they didn't allow gay students, gay scouts for a time. And so school said that violates our non-discrimination policy. Did you know that No Child Left Behind had in it an Equal Access Act for the Boy Scouts? It said no school can keep the Boy Scouts out without loss of all federal funds. It was never talked about. And so now it doesn't matter because the Boy Scouts don't violate those things because they allow gay and lesbians, gay scouts. That reminds me, just for a second. For Father's Day, my daughter gave me a 1948 handbook for boys, Boy Scouts. And so I want you to see how one or two things have changed. Here's what the flag salute is in 1948. I'll just tell it to you. They don't need me to read it to you, but it says, it doesn't have under God in it in 1948. So we're fighting about under God. It's a clergyman that wrote it, and right up until 1954, it didn't say under God. In 1954, Congress put under God in it. It was seen as a way to fight godless communism. So we're fighting over a lot of these things with the Boy Scouts. We're fighting over things about the flag salute and things. Just wanted you to be aware of that. If you want to, I've got proof of it there. And 5 years before that came out, we used to salute the flag like the Third Reich. And the Boy Scouts asked that we would change it to putting our hand over our breast to sway. So the Boy Scouts have had a lot of involvement in some of these things. Right. Let me stop right there and just see. Now, as we talk about public forums and speech, there are some places that have to be open forums for speech. That's not the public schools. Public schools are limited open forums. And in limited open forum, the government nor any state or political subdivision can influence the content or form of any prayer or other religious activity, or compel a school agent or employee to attend a school meeting. This isn't the act, this is the Constitution I'm elucidating now. This isn't that act. And they can't say, oh, I don't want you to have this meeting. If it's a limited open forum, you can't make a decision about its content if you're the government. They get to go forward. You might think it's unwise to have, I would think it'd be unwise to have the Yankees fans get together, for example. But if I'm the government, I would let them, although they should be Red Sox fans. So now, when it comes to limited open forums, What must a school offer? Again, this is a melange of the Act and of the Constitution. So schools are deemed to offer a fair opportunity to students who wish to conduct a meeting within its limited open forum if such school uniformly provides that the meeting is voluntary and student initiated. And I would add, almost always, that the kids don't exclude other kids. Let me stop. Now stop right here, because there's another new third or fourth generation issue coming up. And that's whether or not you have the right to ever exclude anybody. So say you're the Christian John 3:2 club, and you have people who are coming who want to disabuse you of why you should believe in Christ. Do you have the right to say, in order to be in this club, you have to be a believing Christian? We're fighting over that issue right now, even in higher ed too. And it's a really fundamental question and issue under First Amendment free association rights. Do I have the right to use a public building to associate together if the people that are coming are here to kind of destroy my association? Now, there are not a lot of cases yet on that, but it's a big, there's some, and it's going to be a new area that we're going to fight, because I'm feeling a rising hostility occurring towards all religious people. So you can see a concerted effort might be to go to religious people's groups under the Lamb's Chapel doctrine, to be there to be a disruptive influence at some point. Then do they have the right to ever say, oh, no, you can't be here unless you're a believing Christian? My belief would be there's tolerance, there's conduct, there's anti-harassment policies that we can use. So, well, if you're here, you have to, kind of let the forum and the floor be given to the people who want to talk about what we want to talk about. Robert's Rules of Order might be an important thing at that point, okay? There can be no sponsorship. The school can be there, but only in a non-participatory capacity. And the meeting can materially substantially interfere with the educational activities of the school, but they do get to advertise it at the school, as long as they don't disrupt. And then non-school persons can't direct it, okay? And that's how that works, but they have rights other than that. So there are other religious, a non-public forum may be a public school that has not opened its campus. So that's constitutional analysis. So maybe they don't have any clubs. If they don't have any clubs, then who gets to speak? The teachers and the kids inside the curriculum if something's raised, and they say, well, tell me who your person you admire the most. If you ask that question, a kid gets to say it's Christ, it's Muhammad, it's someone else. And if you don't ask that question, I'm not sure the kid gets to interject in the curriculum and take over the curriculum. But either way, the kid doesn't get to have a club where he does the John 3:2 club or the P Flag club or whatever, if you don't have any clubs. Is that a good outcome? I don't know. So it might not be good. The answer is prayers are not the one he's hoping for, but an answer nonetheless, no. Now I'm going to stop because I'm controlling this discussion a little too much. Are you still want to be talking a bit about how we conflict over discussion and speech and things, or is there something else that you want to raise and talk about that we can? Okay, we're going to just keep going then for just a second. And so what about when we have Christmas displays and things, and we have other things? I'm going to suggest to you, not in my materials here, but the Freedom Forum that you have there has a really good book that's on the website for the Freedom Forum that talks about, and it brought together Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, and some people that are LDS and tended to represent the LDS Church but didn't necessarily, about how you can respectfully do things such as, sing hymns to Christmas time, or sing Christmas songs, or have Christmas observances, or have other observances. And so here's some of the basic things, and it's not as limiting as you might think, especially if it's not intended, if it doesn't, to sort of overpower minority religions. I want you to know that is changing too. One more justice on the Supreme Court could really tip that in a big way. We don't know where that's going to go, even with the current justices. Okay, if it's all right though, yes, please.
I just saw a headline, I never did see the whole story, about the marching band in Mississippi that was not allowed to play. There was a marching band in Mississippi that had, I think it was How Great Thou Art, or a song, hymn along those lines, in their halftime show. And based on a court ruling,
Yeah.
somebody interpreted that to say they couldn't do it.
Let's go quickly to this right here. Let's go to the Rachel Bachman case. So it occurred in Salt Lake. Rachel Bachman, and I have great moral authority to talk about this case. I'm going to go on record. The person who was the in this case, who was the band leader for the school, through a funny circumstances, I own his doghouse. So I actually have his dog, and I will conduct tours. So Rachel Bachman was Jewish. You could be reading this as we're doing this. Some ugly things happened. And she said, wait, we shouldn't sing this song. It's very religious at my graduation. And they didn't really treat it real sensitively. And it became a law case, and she went for it and got an injunction stopping them from singing that religious song at graduation. Now, remember, back to the Lee versus Wiseman case about prayer at graduation, the argument was floated then that, hey, you don't have to go to graduation, so why does it matter? We can let there be prayers. The Supreme Court would not bite on that relatively reddish herring and said, you don't have to decide what government things you get to, even if they're not required, because you go pick up your diploma. And they said that's not a reason to make it constitutional to pray at school. So we're now in a forum where, whatever we do, you can't say, well, you don't have to be here. We don't do that to minorities and religious minorities under the Constitution. But she got an injunction. Now, let's understand how you get an injunction. What are the standards for getting an injunction? You have to have a reasonable likelihood of winning on the merits. So a judge looked at it and said, she might win. She has a reasonable likelihood of winning. And you can't get money damages after the fact that'll take care of you. So before you go to trial, get an injunction, and then we'll decide what the Constitution or whatever says later. So she won an injunction. They were in the, what's the concert hall in Salt Lake? The Brigham Hall. And they were there, and when it came time for that, it was a big deal in all the papers in Salt Lake. Does someone remember this when it was happening? And they passed out coming in to all the people coming in the words of this song. Something was up. By the way, President Hinckley was in the audience. Had a granddaughter or someone, or great-granddaughter graduated, I think. And when it came time that they were going to sing that, but he wasn't allowed to, the band director theatrically just raised his hands, walked down, shook his head, and sort of, I don't know what it meant, okay? And so then a kid gets up and leads them, and they sing it. Rachel Bachman leaves the choir, runs out, and in tears, leaves her graduation. Not exactly a good way to treat a minority religion in some ways. And then, and I've seen the video of this, one of my doctoral students were studying some of this, and it's all out, but I see your hand. Were you?
Well, yeah, I'm just curious, someone had filed an injunction that they were offended because she had done that. What would the courts have done?
I don't know, but in this case, the court said she had a reasonable likelihood of winning, and so they.
Right, but I'm saying if someone had stood up for themselves, like.
Well, they did. Greg Nielsen and others from Snell and Wilmer fought the other side of the injunction, so they got the judge to agree with her to that extent.
To go and agree with her, but
right.
I'm saying if there's a group that felt that they had the right to do that.
Well, that was fully briefed. That was what the issue was all about.
And they had gone for an injunction as well.
Right. That's what the issue was all about. That, and they lost. Okay, on the injunction, not at trial, at an injunction level, because it didn't go to trial yet. Because they're going to win at trial. Hold on, because they're going to win at trial.
Okay? Yeah, because this is the thing that has concerned me a lot is that as much as I respect their viewpoint, this is a country of the majority rules.
This is a country that the majority rules at the ballot box on some things, but it is a constitutional republic. That's why the Supreme Court had to say, how are we going to use the Constitution to protect religious minorities? That's especially what we do in this. So the court, it was fully briefed. Greg and the Nielsen's, they were fully briefed, that exact argument. That's why they were all up in arms about it. And the judge said, we don't know, we're not making a decision, I'm not making a decision, but I'm saying you've got a reasonable likelihood of winning, and so granted the injunction. I'll tell you what happens at trial in a second, okay? Because he's going to win at trial. Your argument's going to sort of win at trial. But does all that, and She leaves, they sing, the crowd's invited to stand, it's kind of like a mob, and they sing it together. By the way, a question for you, did President Hinckley stand? And outside, what did President Hinckley say when he was interviewed? He did not stand, and he said no comment. So he didn't add gas to these flames. But other people thought this was a major, big issue, that we were losing religious freedom. Where another way to look at it is we were protecting religious minorities. But when it went to trial, Rachel Bachman loses. Okay? And they say that you can sing relatively religious things because, you know, the works of Kirkemeister and others that do these choral groups are quite religious. And so if you count them out, you know, you're not going to be able to sing anything as a choral group. And so I'm going to put that to the question that was raised. Can a band do How Great Thou Art? The answer is probably. It depends on if it's done all the time and if it's done in a way that limits religious minorities in big ways. I see her hand again. Can I get a mic? Okay, well, we're taking questions now, so we're
Just a real quick comment. I wonder what would have happened if they would have allowed her to choose a song as well, so that they sang a song that represented her
Okay.
as well as ours.
Could
It
be a
would
good-
seem
could
instead
be a
of
better
denying one,
Well,
in denying, you know, the
Good
majority, you could just allow them
Right.
a comment. Or
so everyone understand what she said? This is Christy Snowden. Why not celebrate more religions and say, well, why does that have to hurt your religion? Well, by the way, in Canada, that's what they tend to do. They let there be all kinds of religious observances. So I think that can be done without violating the deep intents of the Constitution, as long as we don't intimidate religious minorities too much.
You give them opportunity.
Yeah, I think it can be done. That wasn't the issue presented to the court at the time. But then again, the viewpoint you're talking about kind of won anyway at trial. So that's just a way to get to that, all right? Now I'm going to stop, and I'm not going to do anything else in terms of, you've got what I've written out here, you've got other things you can look at. Will you just let me tell you a bit, and then there's just bad research that seems to show religious people are bigots, and it's growing. And I just want you to know that that's going to continue to be a challenge when people see us engaged. People will think that we're a problem. Right now, when kids go to college and high school, on all of the research, you can see all their indicators, reported by themselves, tend to go down from other faiths. Let's look at the trend line for Latter-day Saints, though. They get more college, and this isn't just the influence of BYU, that all those trend lines go up. You'd have to ask yourself, okay, are some religions different than other religions? And so I want to just stop with this. There's research that shows also the kids that are intrinsic, who have deep religious values, they're asked questions like, do you agree that it's natural for there to be homosexual relations between men and men? And then they decide whether they're bigots because they're answered on that. I'm not sure you discovered hate or bigotry when you asked that question of, by the way, psychology students, by the way, but then you look for, and you compare it to deeply religious students who are intrinsics. They call ones who, on their other testing before that, say they're deeply religious. I think that might just find a doctrinal difference. And then they ask, well, are you going to be able to love the sinner but hate the sin? And they ask those questions. I just want you to know about research. And I've written an article, I didn't put a site for this, if you wanted to look for it in BYU Education and Law Journal, or is it the BYU Law Review? Oh, it's the BYU Law Review. Just look for Scott Ferrin. I'm not in the Law Review at BYU that much. And it talks about this research. This research shows, it was about 3 or 4 years ago I published this in BYU Law Review. And just put Ferrin, F-E-R-R-I-N, BYU Law Review, Google, and you might see it, I think, pretty quickly and easily. But the research showed that kids that were deeply religious, at a deeply religious school that was a liberal arts school, and it wasn't BYU, they had a certain percentage that they were willing to help a gay student go to a gay rally, give them money or whatever. The more of them would help a gay student go see their grandparents, so what's love, what's politics, But then, after they've been under the influence of their deeply religious faculty at the college for 2 years, their percentages of being willing to help those gay students went up. Is it religion, or is it not enough religion that causes these antisocial behaviors we've seen? I'm going to suggest that, for example, if you ask Latter-day Saints things about natural, Well, we have a little thing from King Benjamin in Mosiah that the natural man is an enemy to God. We're supposed to become as little children, humble, submissive, those kinds of things. Well, we might get caught up in the term natural, and these researchers have no clue about that. No clue what's going on. And then we'll find all these kids who are LDS say bigots. But that's just bad research. And I criticize and critique and work on research all the time. That's what I do. So I'm going to suggest for us, and I'm going to stop, we should really spend a lot of time helping find and helping celebrate good research about the positive effects of religion, and being good campers ourselves. That's one of the things I suggest in here. Don't just show up at PTA or at the school or whatever when there's a problem. Be their help all the way along. Be known as a reasonable voice. And then when something comes up, it might be easier to have them hear you about, hey, I think you could have done this better. And kids are allowed to pray in the lunchroom, around the flag, and other things. You're being a little too careful. Kids are allowed to read and access certain books that you're limiting or whatever. Now I'm going to stop. And back to questions and answers. We got 7 more minutes. Questions and answers. Please, President Wright.
Do you agree that a lot of harm can be done?
Do you agree that a lot of harm can be done by persons who may be zealous, but they mischaracterize certain issues as being religious, and they're really not, and they don't follow the law. They just try to throw the religion card in there where it justifies them in taking their position. But really, it hurts the cause of religious freedom when they do that.
I think I agree with that completely. Okay, that people, because they care so much and they want to do the right thing, but they haven't been engaged with the school already, and they haven't been engaged with some of this, discourse. But the people they're talking to at the school have had to take, if they're a school leader, they've had to take an education law course from someone like me. You know that? And so those people will know the Constitution and things a little better sometimes than the parent who comes forward, and they feel it deeply. But it might not be a center feature of that religion. It might be a political matter, or it might be something else, and it might be hurting our other fundamental questions. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think that's part of what I'm hearing at other parts of this conference too. We need to not, to go after what's really important, and to do it in a good, powerful way. Please. Yes, right.
So in my primary class, sorry about the loudness there.
In my primary class.
My primary class.
Where you can be deeply religious.
Exactly.
The kids
this is
all
a
let you.
religious freedom thing, right?
Okay.
So anyway, I teach these young children, and one of the little 11-year-old boys happened to be relating during the gospel lesson that we were having that when he was at school, a friend was asking him about prayer and like, well, what is prayer and that kind of thing. And so then this little boy said, well, this is what prayer is, and and this is when we pray. And he started talking about it, and this was like not during class time, it was some other time. And another boy came up to him and said, whoa, you can't talk about that, and called him out.
Great point.
And then all of a sudden the teacher was called in, and then they mentioned to the parents that, he can't be talking about that. And I thought, well, obviously based on what you're telling us, he absolutely could be talking about that.
Right.
Yeah, and so how do people get misinformed like this, and how do we help people get informed correctly?
In my handout, some of this is discussed, and we didn't want to go through it today. You can take this with you and look at it a little bit. One of the things that's in it is a model of Utah's R277-105 et sec. Just put that into the Google and thumb them, R277-105, and it'll pop right up. And it says that you have a bedrock right to do those kinds of things. The students do. Even they say, it might be ultra vires, might be beyond their authority. They say, as the state, and I'm going to get to your hand, as a school leader, you have the right to say if there's a spontaneous question. Remember, we cannot answer spontaneous questions about sex ed in Utah. But we can answer only spontaneous questions, according to this statute, this regulation, about religion. So absolutely, kids have a bedrock right to do that. But other kids and other people think it's completely verboten. You say, whoa, you can't talk about religion. Actually, I can, because I'm not the state. And I'm not getting in the way, and I'm not disrupting, and I'm not taking over the curriculum. So please, his hand goes up. But how do people get those ideas? They get those ideas because we've made ceremonial religion so distant from American life now. and something builds up that religion itself is just toxic and pornographic. And that's why I'm a little bit in favor of maybe a little more religious things, including, I think there might be a way we could invite prayer back in and not violate the Constitution, but right now there isn't. But we could work towards such a form. Please.
So what do you do, or who do you call when you know that those rights have been violated? Like
ACLU. Seriously, because they'll talk to me. I'll be a cooperating attorney for that. And I'll come in like gangbusters, or someone like me. So, but you don't have to go that far. You don't have to go nuclear. You can just get to a leader and say, are you sure about this? Because Dr. Ferrin suggested to me, and you can gently and quietly. When you've got all the power, you can be gentle.
One of my best friends was called in by an administrator and explicitly told that he could not express an opinion in favor of traditional values because someone overheard him talking and was apparently offended by it and reported it. And I was kind of riled up and was like, we need to do something.
Well, this is the battleground. You can't say, I care about the family, I care about... Well, yes, you can. But we need to understand and carefully monitor the lines between harassment, and expression of religious belief. But it's not the kids that we're protected from. We are protected from harassment. But it's the state we're protected from on that. Please. I'm going to go here, then back here.
We need to just have one more question because
Okay.
we need to end for the next session to come in here. So just
There's
one more
2 minutes
question.
left, so we better take this one.
Just really fast. I do a little bit of substitute teaching every once in a while, and the teacher hadn't left a big list for us to do, and I thought, oh, we'll just leave it for some time for the students to have questions. And these students are craving opportunities for this kind of discussion. Some of the questions are, is God dead? I'm going, okay, what do I do? And I just let them discuss it. But another question was, should I be afraid of a Muslim as a friend? They're really confused and seeking opportunities for discussion.
All right. They are. And they have rights to talk about it. And so we just don't want to have the state establish it, because you're not always going to like what the state says anyway about it. So I would suggest the answer in general is knowledge. If my handbook, my little pieces of paper will help, and these handbooks will help, then I'd suggest that John 13:34. Go ahead and let people be wrong and be mean to you, and gently, especially when all the power's on your side, and over here, all the power's on your side, to gently let them come to the awareness, especially when it gets to their lawyer, that the power's on your side, instead of going nuclear right at the beginning.
Thank you, Professor
Be examples of the believer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.